There is a reason truth is often unwelcome. It has a way of cutting through layers of comfort, piercing through the soft lies we tell ourselves to sleep better at night. Truth doesn't knock gently, it barges in. It doesn't whisper sweet words to keep the peace, it raises its voice when silence starts to rot the soul. And in the context of relationships, especially when a man returns after no contact, truth has a way of making people squirm in their own justifications. It doesn't let anyone stay the same. It calls you out, it wakes you up. We don't like being uncomfortable. Comfort is warm, it's familiar. Even if it's built on broken promises or half-hearted effort, comfort gives us something to cling to. The mind clings to patterns, even if those patterns are toxic. And when someone returns after leaving you in silence, part of you wants to believe the narrative that suits your desire. Maybe he realized I'm the one. Maybe he just needed time to think. Maybe he was scared. Those are comfortable thoughts, but truth is not always found in the soft places. Truth is often hidden in the ache, in the silence, in the actions that spoke louder than the words ever could. Truth demands you look not just at what's being said when he returns, but at what was not said when you were waiting, when he disappeared, when your messages were read but not answered, when your heart ached and he knew, and still remained silent. That silence wasn't an accident, it was a message, but we rewrite it, we dress it up, we turn neglect into mystery, we call distance space instead of what it really was, disregard, because the real truth. It hurts, and most people would rather stay in a lie that feels good than face a truth that makes them change. When someone you cared for walks away without explanation, when they go no contact, what they are saying without words is that your presence is no longer required. That your emotions, your thoughts, your concerns, they don't carry enough weight for a response. That is not romantic. That is not just a phase. That is a choice. And when they come back, suddenly wanting to talk, suddenly remembering your name, suddenly finding the courage to send that message, the truth doesn't disappear. It stands there, waiting to be acknowledged. And yet, comfort calls louder. Comfort says, give him another chance. Truth says, why now? Comfort says, people change. Truth says, did he really? Truth asks questions most people don't want to answer. Because the answers lead to a mirror, and not everyone is ready to look in it. Truth says, if he could live without you once, what makes you think he won't again? Truth says, if he really saw your worth, why did it take losing you to acknowledge it? Truth is not cruel, but it is not tame. It doesn't stroke your ego, it breaks the illusion. It brings you back to reality, not to hurt you, but to heal you through confrontation. And the uncomfortable truth about why some men return after no contact is this: not all returns are born from love. Some are born from boredom, from ego, from loneliness, from the realization that the grass wasn't greener, and now they want to come back, not because they see your value, but because they feel their lack. And yet, many women will welcome them with open arms, not because they've seen change, but because they crave closure, because they want to be chosen, finally. But being chosen after being abandoned is not a victory, it's a temptation. A test, and how you respond reveals whether you've embraced truth or you're still feeding on comfort. It's hard, it really is. The heart wants what it wants. But if what it wants is someone who disappears in the silence and returns without accountability, then that want has been shaped by pain, not by truth. Because truth would tell you, you deserve consistency, not chaos. You deserve presence, not absence. You deserve someone who doesn't have to lose you to realize they need you. Truth pierces comfort because it calls out every excuse you made for their behavior. It doesn't let you hide behind what-ifs or romantic daydreams. It drags the light into the dark corners you've ignored for too long. It shows you the trail of red flags you stepped over. It reminds you that love is not proven in return. It is proven in consistency. In action, in integrity, in showing up when it's hard, not just when it's convenient. So when he comes back, the question isn't, does he miss me? The question is, was the silence a mistake or a pattern? And even if he says the right things, even if the words drip with sincerity, truth demands that you look beyond the words. Truth tells you to watch the fruit, not just listen to the speech, because anyone can say, I'm sorry. Anyone can say, I've changed, but not everyone means it. And those who do will show you before they ask for anything. If truth pierces, let it. If it stings, don't run, lean into it, because it's better to be broken by truth than held together by a lie. And in time, you will see that the very thing that hurt you, truth, was actually the thing that freed you. Comfort will always say, take him back. Truth will always ask, at what cost? And the answer to that question could very well change the rest of your life. There is something dangerously deceptive about sympathy. It feels right, it feels kind, it sounds noble, even sacred. This willingness to understand, to see someone's pain, to hold space for their struggle. And yes, in many ways, sympathy is a beautiful thing, but when it comes to the return of someone who once chose silence, who chose to walk away without warning or explanation, sympathy can become a trap. It can blind you, it can soften your resolve at the very moment you need to see things clearly, because when the man who went no contact suddenly reappears, he doesn't just bring his words, he brings a story. A story meant to pull on your heartstrings, a story shaped to win your compassion, and if you're not anchored in moral clarity, you will find yourself excusing behavior that should never have been tolerated. Moral clarity is the ability to see right as right and wrong as wrong, even when emotions are loud, even when your heart is conflicted. It's not cold, it's not cruel, but it is unshakable. It doesn't yield to charm. It doesn't bend to sob stories. It doesn't trade truth for tenderness when the stakes are high. Because in matters of the heart, especially with someone who once ignored yours, what you need most is not an open door, it's clear vision. Sympathy says, he must have been going through something. Moral clarity says, and yet, he chose to leave me alone in my pain. Sympathy says, maybe he was scared. Moral clarity says, but fear does not excuse abandonment. There's a reason people return with carefully crafted apologies. They know the human heart has a soft spot for remorse. They know the right tone, the right pause in their voice, the well-timed, I never stopped thinking about you. And before you realize it, you've gone from guarded to guilty. You start to feel bad for being hurt. You start to doubt your own anger. You wonder if you've been too harsh, too unforgiving. But that's not compassion, that's confusion. And confusion is the enemy of discernment. Moral clarity demands you remember what happened, not just how it feels now that they're back. It requires you to take your emotions and set them beside the facts, not to dismiss your feelings, but to test them. To see whether they're leading you toward healing or back into harm, because the reality is, not everyone who says, I'm sorry, is truly repentant, and not every return is born from transformation. Sometimes people come back because they feel entitled to access. Sometimes they return not because they've changed, but because they think you haven't, and that's where sympathy becomes dangerous, because sympathy without clarity becomes an open gate to manipulation. It lowers the standard, it excuses the offense, it wraps wrongdoing in a warm blanket of empathy, and slowly, almost without noticing, you find yourself comforting the one who hurt you, making room for the same patterns that once drained you. But moral clarity sees through the performance. It doesn't ignore the human behind the mistake, but it refuses to let sympathy silence accountability. This is not about being harsh, it's about being honest. About holding the line when everything in you wants to fold. It's about recognizing that while people can change, change is not measured by stories. It's measured by fruit, by action, by humility, by effort over time. And until you see that, sympathy is premature, forgiveness can be offered without trust being restored, you can release bitterness without rebuilding a bridge, that is moral clarity, you can sit across from someone and listen to their pain without forgetting your own. You can acknowledge someone's struggle without ignoring the damage they caused. You can love someone from a distance, even when everything in you wants to bring them close. That is what strength looks like. Not heartlessness, but boundaries, not pride, but discernment, not revenge, but wisdom. When you allow sympathy to rule where clarity should lead, you end up betraying yourself. You make decisions based on guilt instead of truth. You start believing that understanding someone's pain means excusing their behavior, but that's a lie. Compassion does not require self-betrayal. You can care deeply about someone and still say, no more. You can want the best for someone and still know you're not what's best for them, not if they treat your love like a revolving door. And for those who believe in second chances, who feel torn at the idea of saying no to someone who seems remorseful, know this: second chances are not given freely to avoid discomfort. They are earned through consistency, through humility, through actions that restore what was broken. Sympathy says he's trying. Moral clarity asks, is he growing? Sympathy says he needs me. Moral clarity says, what has he done with what I already gave? That is the measure, not tears, not apologies, not poetic words or romantic regret. The measure is what they do now that they're back, whether they own their choices, whether they confront the silence they created, whether they show up without demanding instant forgiveness, whether they prioritize your healing over their comfort. If they do not bring that, then they are not back for you. They are back for what you give. And love is not a charity where you keep handing out pieces of your soul in the hope that someone will finally appreciate them. This is why moral clarity must come first, because the heart, as beautiful as it is, can be deceived. It wants to hope, it wants to believe, but hope without wisdom is a dangerous thing. It leads you into cycles you were born to break. And if you don't lead your emotions with clarity, your emotions will lead you back into confusion. So let the man return if he must. Let him speak, let him explain, but let your heart be governed by truth, not pity. Let your boundaries be shaped by self-worth, not nostalgia. Let your decision be rooted in what is right, not in what temporarily feels good. Because the moment you allow sympathy to take the lead in the absence of moral clarity, you are no longer loving him, you are rescuing him. And you were not made to save someone who is unwilling to save themselves. There comes a point where you have to stop pointing fingers and start holding a mirror. A point where you realize that no matter how wrong someone else may have been, your healing, your boundaries, your decisions, they are yours to own. This is what personal responsibility looks like. It is not about blaming yourself for someone else's actions. It is not about excusing the wrong done to you. It's about taking hold of your life again. It's about choosing not to live as a victim of someone else's choices, but instead becoming the author of your next chapter. When a man returns after no contact, it is tempting to shift all attention to him, his reasons, his regrets, his timing, but that's only half the story. The other half is you. How did you respond when he left? How did you cope with the silence? And more importantly, how will you respond now? That's the question responsibility demands you answer. It's easy to blame him for the confusion. It's easy to say, he ghosted me, he hurt me, he left, and maybe all of that is true. But the deeper question, the one that responsibility asks, is this: now that he's back, what are you going to do about it? This isn't about shaming yourself. It's about growing up emotionally and spiritually. It's about refusing to live your life on the defense, always reacting to what someone else does or doesn't do. Because if you're always waiting for people to change, for people to come back, for people to treat you better, you're putting your life on pause for people who already showed you what they're capable of. That's not empowerment, that's avoidance. And if you're honest, you know this. Sometimes we focus so much on what someone did to us so we don't have to face what we're doing to ourselves. Responsibility calls you to rise higher than your pain. To see that while what he did might have been unfair, the decision to stay in that place of hurt over and over again is no longer about him. That's on you. You can't control if someone walks away, but you can control if they get to come back without consequence. You can't stop someone from going silent, but you can decide what silence teaches you, and if all it does is leave you more attached, more confused, more desperate for validation, then it's time to admit that you haven't truly stepped into your own power yet. And let's be real, responsibility is hard, because it doesn't let you play the victim card. It doesn't let you sit in the corner waiting to be rescued. It doesn't let you keep telling the same story of heartbreak if you're not willing to change the narrative. Taking responsibility for your part in your healing means you stop chasing closure from the one who broke you. It means you stop interpreting his return as a sign of fate and start seeing it as a test of your growth. It means you stop asking, "Does he still love me?" and start asking, "Do I still love myself enough to protect my peace?" Because it's not enough to say, "He shouldn't have left." That's obvious. The deeper question is, why did I tolerate his disappearance in the first place? Why did I wait by the phone? Why did I romanticize the silence? Why did I let his absence define my worth? Those are the questions that crack something open in you. And it's uncomfortable, it really is, but that discomfort is where healing begins. That's where responsibility turns pain into power, because you can't change what you don't confront. There's a version of you that exists on the other side of accountability. A version that no longer waits for someone else to show up to feel whole. A version that doesn't get swept away by someone's sudden interest. A version that can listen to an apology and still say no. That version is built through responsibility. Not the kind that wears guilt like a crown, but the kind that stands tall and says, "I may not have caused the wound, but I choose to heal it. I choose to grow from it. I choose to never abandon myself the way he abandoned me." And maybe no one ever told you this, but you don't owe anyone a second chance just because they came back. You don't owe them access just because they feel regret. Their change, if it's real, should lead them to humility, not entitlement. And your healing should lead you to clarity, not confusion. But that won't happen if you keep waiting for someone else to do the work for you. You have to pick up the pieces. You have to draw the line. You have to be the one who says, "This is what I accept. This is what I refuse. This is who I am becoming now." People talk about boundaries like they're walls, but they're not. They're doors that you learn to open and close with discernment. Responsibility teaches you how to use those doors. It teaches you when to say yes and when to walk away. It teaches you that being kind doesn't mean being a doormat, and that being forgiving doesn't mean being foolish. You don't have to be cold to be strong, but you do have to be honest. And the truth is, if you keep letting someone re-enter your life without accountability, that's not on them anymore, that's on you. That's the part no one wants to hear, because it's easier to say, "He's toxic," than to say, "I allowed toxicity to keep me company." It's easier to say, "He's emotionally unavailable," than to admit, "I ignored the signs because I didn't want to be alone." But when you finally take responsibility, you begin to rewrite the script. You stop begging for someone to see your worth and start living like you already know it. You stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing yourself. So when he comes back, and he probably will, don't just listen to what he says. Listen to how far you've come. Remember the tears you cried. Remember the strength it took to move forward. Remember the promise you made to yourself. And ask, does welcoming him back honor the woman I'm becoming? Because if it doesn't, then your responsibility is clear, not to him, to you, to the version of yourself who deserves more than empty words and recycled apologies. To the future you're building, one decision at a time. Responsibility is not a burden, it's a weapon, and it's time to use it. Deception doesn't walk into your life wearing a mask and flashing warning signs. It comes dressed in familiarity. It knows what you want to hear, and it learns how to say it. It studies your wounds, then offers the illusion of healing. And when someone who once disappeared from your life returns with soft words and solemn eyes, deception doesn't feel like danger, it feels like hope. But that's the trick. That's the way it works. Deception never presents itself as a lie. It shows up as something that looks just close enough to the truth to make you second. Guess what you already knew deep down? When he returns after no contact, you want to believe it means something. That maybe he had to leave to realize what he lost. That maybe he's come back changed, stronger, more aware, and he might say all the right things. He might speak of regret. He might call you the one who got away. He might even cry. But if you're not grounded in discernment, you'll mistake emotion for evidence. You'll confuse performance for repentance, because deception doesn't just twist the facts. It reshapes your memory. It takes what hurt you and repackages it as something that made you stronger. It takes the abandonment and sells it as growth. And in your desire to believe the best, you may lower your guard against the worst. Deception works through your longing. It doesn't need to be strong if your hope is unchecked. All it has to do is whisper a version of the truth you wish were real. You want to believe that people come back changed. You want to believe that silence was reflection, that absence was maturity in the making. But sometimes absence is just selfishness. Sometimes silence is avoidance. And returning doesn't always mean redemption. It can also mean convenience. But deception doesn't want you to see that. It wants you to fixate on the return, not the reason, on the words, not the pattern. There's a strange kind of spiritual blindness that comes with emotional hunger. When your heart is aching to be seen, heard, chosen, you'll squint your eyes until red flags start to look like roses. You'll say things like, "But he came back," as if that alone is virtue. As if returning erases the cost of his absence. But deception doesn't erase, it distracts. It knows that timing can be used like bait, that showing up after enough time has passed can look like growth when it's really just a calculated move. That saying, "I miss you," doesn't cost anything if he knows it's all you've been waiting to hear. You cannot afford to be naive with your heart, not after what you've already survived, not after the sleepless nights, not after the prayers, the tears, the questioning of your worth. Deception will never remind you of the pain it caused. It will only emphasize the pleasure it promises. It will point you forward just enough to keep you from looking back clearly. And if you're not careful, you'll enter the same cycle under a different name. You'll call it a second chance, but really it's a repeat. You'll call it new beginnings, but it's the same old script. He might not even be trying to deceive you intentionally. That's the thing. Sometimes deception works through people who are deceived themselves. Maybe he believes he's changed. Maybe he believes he's ready. But believing something doesn't make it true. If he hasn't done the deep work, faced his pride, acknowledged his absence, dealt with the reasons why he disappeared in the first place, then his return is not redemption. It's relapse, and the more you excuse it, the more deception tightens its grip. You have to test the fruit, not just trust the face. You have to examine the track record, not just the tears, because deception has no power over a heart anchored in truth. It preys on desperation, not discernment. It needs you to be emotionally fragile. It needs you to be tired, lonely, vulnerable, because in that space, you're more likely to choose familiarity over wisdom. But familiarity is not proof of safety. Just because someone knows how to make you feel something doesn't mean they're meant to hold your heart again. One of the hardest things to accept is that someone can know your value and still not treat you right. They can recognize your worth and still fall short. That's not always because they're evil or manipulative. Sometimes they're simply not ready. But deception doesn't want you to see readiness. It wants you to see potential. Because potential is hope without accountability. It's the dream of what could be rather than the reality of what is. And if you build your decision on potential, you'll ignore all the warning signs in the name of love. Deception will have you believe that you're being cold for not taking him back, that you're unforgiving, that you're bitter, but protecting your heart is not bitterness. It's wisdom. Saying no is not cruelty, it's clarity. Love does not require you to invite confusion back into your life. Grace can be extended without doors being reopened. Forgiveness can be given without repeating the past. He may say all the things you've prayed to hear. He may finally speak about the things he used to avoid. But deception doesn't need to lie directly. It just needs you to fill in the blanks, to assume growth where there's no proof, to interpret emotion as change. And that's where many fall, not because they're weak, but because they're weary. You want to believe it's different this time. You want to believe the story has a redemptive ending, but not every story needs a reunion to be redeemed. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to ask the hard questions, to examine the motives, to weigh the words, to look at the history without romantic filters, because truth isn't afraid of scrutiny, deception is. And if what he says cannot hold up under the weight of truth, then it's not real change. It's a performance, and no matter how convincing it sounds, your heart deserves more than a good act. You've come too far to let deception disguise itself as destiny. You've learned too much to mistake a return for a reason. You've healed too deeply to settle for recycled promises. So when the familiar knock comes, listen carefully. Don't be moved by emotion. Be moved by evidence. By consistency, by truth, because love built on lies, even soft, sweet, convincing lies, will always collapse, and your heart was not made to live in ruins. There's a kind of discernment that doesn't whisper. It doesn't wait. It doesn't shy away in fear of being too harsh, too much, too critical. It stands like a sword in the center of a room, sharp and unmoved. It sees through sweet words and tired excuses. It hears beyond the tone and into the truth. It does not settle for maybes, for almosts, for not yets. Bold discernment is not born from pride or suspicion. It is born from wisdom forged in pain, refined in silence, and rooted in truth. And when he returns after no contact, bold discernment doesn't rush to welcome or to reject. It watches. It weighs. It waits without wavering. The world will tell you to soften your voice, to keep your questions light, to believe the best even when the fruit is missing. But bold discernment is not impressed by sentiment. It doesn't confuse vulnerability with reliability. It asks, who is this man before me now? Not who was he, not who I hoped he'd be, but who has he become while he was gone? It's easy to come back, it's easy to say the right things, but discernment sees that coming back is not the same as coming clean, and returning is not the same as repenting. He may come back speaking of missing you, of thinking about you every day, of realizing what he lost. That might stir something deep inside you, but bold discernment asks, what did he do with that realization? Did it drive him to humility? Did it lead him to accountability? Or did it simply make him lonely enough to revisit what once felt good? Because there's a difference between a man who returns out of conviction and a man who returns out of convenience, and bold discernment will not be fooled by timing, tears, or temporary regret. To walk in discernment is not to close your heart, it is to guard it. It is not to see evil in every man, but to test the spirit of his return. Bold discernment does not just listen to what is said, it listens to what is missing. What is he not admitting? What questions does he avoid? What responsibility does he shift subtly onto you? This is not paranoia, this is protection, because you know what it cost you when you weren't discerning. You remember the nights of silence, the uncertainty, the self-doubt. You remember how his absence made you question your worth, and now that he returns, your discernment must speak louder than your longing. There is a temptation, especially in the softness of your heart, to see bold discernment as too harsh, as if it's not feminine or gracious enough. But discernment is not a denial of your grace. It's a defense of it. It says, my love is a gift, not a guarantee. It says, access to my life is not a right. It is a privilege. It says, if you want to return, you don't get to bypass the examination. You don't get to step over the mess you made and pretend we're picking up where we left off. Bold discernment demands that bridges are rebuilt with brick and sweat, not just memories and charm. And maybe people around you will say you're being too hard. That you should be open-minded, that people change, that everyone deserves a second chance. But discernment knows that grace without truth is just enabling. It's just another way to stay stuck while calling it love. So you let them talk, you let them misunderstand, because bold discernment does not look for applause. It is not swayed by opinion. It answers to a deeper knowing. It answers to the voice that whispered to you in the dark nights when you cried alone. The voice that told you not to settle, the voice that carried you forward when you almost went back. That voice has never lied to you. You don't have to be rude to be discerning. You don't have to be cold to be careful. You don't have to shut down to stand up for yourself. Bold discernment can sit across the table, look someone in the eye, and say, I hear you, but I will not be moved by sentiment. I need to see fruit. It can smile while saying, that version of you is no longer enough for the version of me who had to grow in your absence. It can hold a line, not in bitterness, but in peace, because discernment brings peace that surpasses emotional noise, peace that doesn't shift with every apology. Discernment doesn't need drama, it doesn't argue, it doesn't try to convince someone of your worth, It knows, it waits, it listens, it sees, and when you walk in it boldly, you begin to feel the strength of your own spirit. You realize you're not just someone who got left behind. You are someone who rose in the silence. You are someone who grew in the waiting. And now, you are someone who refuses to trade clarity for chemistry. That is bold discernment. So when he looks at you like he remembers, when he touches your hand like it still belongs to him, when he says, "I've changed," let discernment rise in you like fire. Ask yourself, what has he changed into? What has he sacrificed to return? What has he done, not just said, that proves this is not a cycle, but a new creation? And if the answers are not clear, if the pattern still lingers, if your spirit feels unsettled, do not move. Do not explain your hesitance. Do not apologize for your boundaries. Bold discernment does not apologize for protecting what it took everything to rebuild. Let him prove himself in silence before you respond with softness. Let time test his intentions, let action define his words, because anyone can say, "I miss you," but only a man with integrity will say, "I'm here to make it right," and actually stay long enough to prove it. And if he's not that man, if all he brings is echoes of what once was, then your discernment will save you from a future that looks too much like your past. That is why you must walk boldly, see clearly, and guard fiercely. Because your peace, your purpose, and your future deserve nothing less.